At my mother's funeral, my own brother stood up and said, "She deserved to die alone." The words hit the room like a thunderclap, sharp, cold, unforgiving. Nobody said a word after that. The silence was suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I felt my hands trembling, clutching the worn tissue in my lap as if it was the only thing holding me together. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Michael, my older brother, stood there, eyes hard, face set like stone. The same brother I used to trust, the one who knew all our scars, all the secrets Mom tried so hard to bury. But today, he was a stranger, a man I barely recognized. "She chose this life," he spat, voice dripping with contempt, "and now she's paying the price." It was as if the years of silence between them, years I never fully understood, had finally exploded in that tiny, cold funeral home. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to remind him of the nights Mom stayed awake, worrying over him, trying to fix what was broken. But the words caught in my throat. No one moved. The pastor shifted uncomfortably, avoiding our eyes. The few distant relatives seated in the back exchanged glances, their faces masks of awkward pity. They didn't know her like we did. They didn't know the battles she fought alone. Mom had never been perfect. Far from it. But to hear her son talk like she was some criminal, some lost cause, it felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than grief. I sat there, frozen, watching Michael sit down smugly, arms crossed like he'd just won a war no one else knew they were fighting. Just as I was gathering every ounce of strength to stand and fight back, the back door creaked open. A man walked in. He wore a sharply pressed military uniform, deep green, flawless. His boots echoed on the hardwood floor with a steady, confident rhythm. He didn't glance around or say hello. He walked straight to the casket, stopped and removed his cap with reverence. And then, with a voice that broke the silence like a whip, he said, "I owe her my life." The room froze. Every head turned. Every breath held. The weight of his words settled over us like a storm, shifting the air, twisting the whole room on its axis. I looked at Michael. His smug expression faltered for a moment, replaced by confusion and something like fear. Who was this stranger? And what did he know about my mother that we didn't? That moment cracked everything wide open. And I knew that whatever story I thought I knew about Mom was about to change forever. Michael wasn't always the man who stood there, cold and unforgiving, accusing my mother of deserving to die alone. For years, he was the golden boy, the son everyone expected to succeed, to be the pride of the Sanders family. But life had other plans. By the time he was 25, things had spiraled. Lost jobs, lost friendships, and a growing addiction that swallowed him whole. Mom tried to reach him time and time again, but the distance grew between them like a canyon too wide to cross. Grace Sanders was a complicated woman. To outsiders, she was a cautionary tale, someone broken by life's cruel blows. But to me, she was a fighter. A woman who wrestled with her own shadows after the divorce, battling the weight of depression that threatened to pull her under. Yet, despite it all, she fought tooth and nail to hold our family together, even when it felt like everything was falling apart. The cracks in our family ran deeper than anyone wanted to admit. The silence between Michael and Mom wasn't just anger. It was pain, regret, and a history no one dared speak of aloud. I remember the nights filled with shouting, slamming doors, and tears, each argument peeling back layers of hurt neither of them could fix. It wasn't just about mistakes. It was about love turned bitter, trust shattered, and words spoken in anger that never found their way back. At that funeral, as Michael spat those harsh words, she chose this path, and now she pays the price. I saw more than cruelty. I saw years of heartbreak boiled down into a single, unforgiving sentence. The room held its breath. My throat tightened as the weight of his judgment crushed the memory of the woman I knew, the woman who had carried us all, even when it nearly broke her. But amid that silence, my heart screamed for the truth, for the story beneath the scars, the story no one was brave enough to tell. And then, as if breaking through the darkest storm, the back door creaked open. A man in a military uniform stepped inside, his presence slicing through the tension like a blade. Who was he? And what truth was he about to reveal as he walked steadily toward my mother's casket, defying every ounce of silence in the room? When Anthony Rogers stepped forward, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. He was in his mid-30s, tall and steady, dressed in a crisp military uniform. Slowly, he removed his cap and bowed his head before the casket. Then, with a quiet strength that cut through the heavy silence, he began to speak. "I owe her my life," he said simply. The words landed like a shockwave. No one knew who he was or what he was about to reveal. Anthony was just a stranger to most of us, but to Grace Sanders, he was the boy she refused to give up on. At 18, Anthony was homeless. He'd lost everything. Parents gone, no family, just the cold streets of Chicago to call home. He spent nights curled up behind dumpsters, shivering through bitter winters that felt like they'd freeze his very soul. But Grace, she saw him. Not as a problem, not as someone to avoid. She saw a person drowning in silence and pain. For nearly 6 months, Grace showed up every night. She brought him food, blankets, and hope. She never asked for anything in return. And when Anthony told her he wanted to change, to join the military, she looked him in the eye and said, "If you want to change your life, you gotta start standing tall." Then she handed him a bus ticket to the recruiting office. It wasn't just a ride, it was a lifeline. Anthony took that chance. He enlisted, served 4 years in the U.S. Army, and survived 3 tours overseas. But he never forgot who saved him when no one else would. Now, he mentors kids who, like him, have nowhere to turn. Kids caught in the same darkness Grace helped him escape. As he spoke, the room shifted. Faces softened. Even my brother Michael looked away, unable to meet Anthony's steady gaze. Anthony's story wasn't just about survival. It was about the quiet power of one woman's kindness. A truth no one in the family wanted to hear, but a truth that couldn't be ignored. And just as Anthony's words settled over us, I knew this was only the beginning. After the funeral, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was so much about my mother I'd never known. Who was Grace Sanders, really? What had she done while we were all busy judging her? I had to find out. So I found myself standing in front of Hope Harbor, a community center tucked away in a quiet Chicago neighborhood. It wasn't much to look at, faded paint, cracked steps, but inside, it was alive. Vibrant murals lined the walls, filled with drawings and paintings by the kids who came here for refuge. This was the place where my mother had spent the last 15 years of her life, quietly building something no one ever noticed. I was greeted by Linda, the center's director, who immediately knew who I was. "Miss Grace," she said softly, "was our guiding light." As we walked through the rooms, I saw photos of my mother smiling with groups of teenagers, her arms wrapped around kids who looked like they'd found a safe harbor in her presence. "She never wanted credit," Linda explained. "She just showed up, cooked meals, tutored, listened, worked herself to exhaustion without a single complaint." Listening to the stories, my heart broke and swelled all at once. I heard about the nights she stayed late, helping a boy write his first essay. About the winter when she bought boots for a teen who'd been walking in the snow with holes in his shoes. About the little notes of encouragement she left on bulletin boards, words like, "You are stronger than you know." I spent hours in a small office, going through boxes of letters and notes my mother had left behind. One letter caught my eye, her handwriting shaky but determined, where she wrote about hope and resilience. Tears blurred my vision as I read her words, a side of her I never saw but felt deeply. Linda introduced me to some of the young adults who had once been kids here. One was now studying social work. Another had just landed her first job as a teacher. They spoke with warmth, crediting my mother for giving them a chance when no one else would. For years, I thought I knew Grace Sanders. But what I found was a woman so much more than the broken figure my family painted. A woman who had lived a secret legacy of kindness and strength, one that touched hundreds of lives quietly, without fanfare or thanks. And as I stood there surrounded by the echoes of her love, I knew I couldn't stay silent. This story, the real story, needed to be told. The world needed to hear it, not as a whisper, but loud and clear. Because this was only the beginning. After uncovering the hidden truth about my mother, I knew I couldn't let her story fade into silence again. I sat down at my laptop and began to write, not just about the woman my family thought they knew, but about the real Grace Sanders. The woman who spent her life rescuing lost kids, who fought battles unseen, who loved quietly but fiercely. I poured every piece of what I'd learned into a blog post and shared it across social media. At first, the response was mixed. Michael was quick to dismiss it, sending cold, biting messages that tried to tear down every word I wrote. Other relatives joined in, flooding my inbox with sarcastic comments and outright denials. They clung to the story they wanted to believe, the one that justified their anger and distance. The pressure was crushing. Some nights, I felt utterly alone, like I was shouting into a void where no one cared to listen. But then, the messages started coming from strangers, people who had met Mom, been helped by her, or simply felt moved by the truth I shared. Hundreds of comments poured in, full of thanks, tears, and stories of hope. It was overwhelming, and exactly what I needed to keep going. That's when I decided to honor her legacy in a way that mattered. I launched the Grace Sanders Quiet Light Fund, a $50,000 scholarship to support teenagers who, like Anthony, faced the harshest odds. I wanted to make sure her kindness didn't just stay in memories, but sparked new lives and new chances. Raising the money wasn't easy. I organized local events, reaching out to neighbors, community leaders, and small businesses. Some were skeptical, others inspired. Slowly but surely, the fund grew. I remember one chilly autumn evening, standing in front of a small crowd, sharing my mother's story, feeling the warmth of their support light up the room. It wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming her honor. With every step, I could feel the shift, not just in how my family viewed her, but in how our community began to see the quiet heroes around them. Those who never ask for applause, who give without expectation, who hold others up when no one else will. And even as the fund grew, as the stories multiplied, I realized this fight for truth was far from over. Because changing hearts is only the beginning. Sometimes the hardest stories to tell are the ones that live quietly inside us, unspoken, unfinished, like a scar that never fully heals. As I watched the Grace Sanders Quiet Light Fund grow, seeing the faces of the kids it's helped, a girl who once dropped out now thriving in college, a boy with a laptop in hand ready to chase his dreams, I'm reminded that her strength wasn't loud. It was steady, unseen, and it changed hundreds of lives without ever asking for thanks. Family isn't always perfect. Sometimes it's broken. Sometimes it leaves you with questions that hang heavy in the air, forgiveness that feels just out of reach, and words that never found their way out. But here's what I've learned through it all. We get to choose the story we carry forward. We can honor the quiet heroes, the ones who loved fiercely even when the world turned away. If you see someone like that in your life, someone whose love has been a whisper, a shadow, a lifeline, tell their story. Hold their memory close and let their light keep burning. Because it's in these stories that we find connection, healing, and hope. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt the weight of unspoken love or silent sacrifice, you're not alone. I invite you to share your own stories below, to be part of this community that lifts up the quiet strength around us. And if you want to keep hearing real stories, raw and honest, join me here by liking, subscribing, and sharing. Not because you have to, but because maybe, just maybe, you see a piece of yourself in this story. Grace once told me, kindness isn't always loud, but it's always powerful. That's the legacy I carry, and that's the legacy I want to share with you.